Nobody wants that. We complain when we don't have rain, but it doesn't even come close to touching our food supply. If it began touching our food supply, things get nervous. Things get tense. I remember reading a story about a newscaster, and I'm trying to remember it as best as I can, so don't hold me to exact facts here. But there was something going on in the marketplace, and a newscaster flippantly said something to the effect that if this keeps up, we're going to run out of toilet paper. Nothing really, no substance to the comment. Maybe he had heard something silly or something potentially regarding that. But the supermarkets sold out of toilet paper. You could not find toilet paper anywhere. So this is who we are. This isn't who those people were. This is who we are. This is who Isaac was. We struggle with this sort of trial, material things, and being without material things, whether it's food or toilet paper or what have you. I was reading portions of John Owen's book, Overcoming Sin and Temptation. I got to tell you, the older authors can minister to a place in your soul that's really hard to reach. John Owen's a way old author. But in reading about overcoming sin and temptation, I want to share with you a few of his insights and sort of outline them in such a way that really accommodates our text here this morning. So I'm going to be sharing with you 3 ways in which trials are a blessing. 3 ways in which trials are a blessing. I know most of you pretty well. I can look at different faces in the congregation for the most part and say, if I had to pick like one of the top 5 trials that this person or this couple is experiencing, I probably could get it most of the time. But I can't get all of them. I can't know all your top 5 trials. I can't know all of the fears that you're presently facing right now, but you know them. And if you don't know them, I hope this sermon will help you know them. I hope this sermon will assist you in being able to pinpoint what it is that you fear in an ungodly way right now. What you obsess about in an ungodly way right now. Isaac was caught in this trial where he obsessed in what we'll find to be an unhealthy way. But I trust that each of us in this room have those trials in our lives that tempt us to go an unhealthy route. Whether that's to be incredibly anxious, overly worrisome about whatever this thing that we're thinking about, fearing, or whether it's to treat that trial in an ungodly way. So I have this desire, I'm going to meet it. Since God's not meeting it this way, I'm going to meet it this way. But it's not what God would have you do. Trials can force the hand that way, or our hearts can allow trials to force the hand that way. But I want you to see trials as a blessing. Even though Jesus tells us to pray that we don't enter into them, but they come. They do come. They come by the ordaining of God even. Not to cause you to sin, but to test you and try you and have you come out as silver and gold. And so we want to see a positive viewpoint of trials this morning, even though none of us, if we all threw our shoes or sandals from the Old Testament into a circle, would go in and choose Isaac's at this point. None of us would choose to be in a famine. But it's instructive for us. So let's consider 3 benefits of trials. Are you ready? Here we go. Number 1, trials pull out of us what's there. Trials pull out of us what's in us. See, listen. I can ask any one of you in this room how you think you'd respond to any given situation. And you can tell me without blinking, staring me straight in the face to say, if I was in this situation, here's what I think I would do. But you have no idea. I don't have any idea. I can say till I'm blue in the face, I can tell you till the cows come home how I think I'd respond in a famine or any other trial, temptation, what have you. But we can't know. Literally, you can't truly know until it happens. But what's so helpful about trials is they show you the metal that's in you, or lack thereof. You go through a trial and you see what you're made of, for better or for worse. And that's a blessing. That's a blessing for a believer, even if the believer fails. It's a blessing. Let me give you a couple examples. You've got Abraham. God tells Abraham, even though he knows he's not going to have Abraham sacrifice Isaac, his only precious son with Sarah, he calls Abraham to sacrifice his son, to slay him, to kill him. God's not going to make him go through with it. He knows that in advance, but Abraham doesn't know that. And so he calls him to sacrifice his son. Now, you could have asked Abraham a day prior to this revelation from God and said, Abraham, I'm just going to talk crazy here for a second, but if God wanted you to take the life of your own son, you think you could do it? And Abraham could wax eloquent on what he thought he would do in such and such a circumstance. But until God's voice spoke into his heart and mind and into his reality and experience in that day, take a 3-day journey, make an altar, and sacrifice your boy. Abraham really could have no idea what he'd do. Not dogmatically, anyway. But it happened. God spoke it. He laid it on Abraham, in effect laying Abraham on the altar, his most dear possession probably on planet Earth. The one thing he would have said, just don't do this. It happened. And it's at that point that whatever was inside of him became visible to him. It's visible, seen, out in the open, discussable, a topic of conversation. What Abraham did with this trial. And in Abraham's case, what was inside of him when the trial came, you picture Abraham as a mountain and this trial as miners going into the guts, the heart of this mountain called Abraham. Guess what they found? They found silver. They found gold. Abraham on that 3-day journey, however quick into the journey it came up in his mind, the author of Hebrews tells us, looking back at Genesis, when Abraham says to his servants, me and my son will go up and we will come back. Abraham had reasoned in his mind, the author of Hebrews tells us, that Isaac was essentially dead once when him and Sarah had dead loins and a dead womb. And God made 2 dead people bring about a baby. And he thought and reasoned to himself, if God can do it once, he surely can do it again. And so I will kill him, and I will trust that God will raise this boy from the dead. That's gold. That's silver. Looking at the deepest, darkest valley that a man could possibly fathom and saying, I'll go into it and I will come out of it praising God. That's gold. That's silver. But if it wasn't for the trial, Abraham couldn't have said what was in him in his guts, in his bones, in his heart, and his mind. Sterling faith was discovered within the mountain of Abraham. And friends, just like I know some of your trials, some of your heartaches, I also know that many of you have experienced something akin to what Abraham went through in this trial. Many of us, by God's grace, can look back at our lives, and if we had 5 things to write down that we didn't want to happen, one of those, or 2 of those, or 3 of those things actually happened to us. And in total gratefulness, we are able to look back at God's supernatural work in our hearts in those moments where God carried us. The boat didn't sink. Gold and silver was found, and it's totally by God's grace. But we can look back on those moments and say, man, it was one of the last things that I would have ever wanted to happen. But God carried me, and I didn't jump off the boat. I kept faith. I kept relying on God. And he showed up every time he showed up. And he gave me grace to do what I would have thought, had you asked me before, was totally impossible. Some of you know that. Some of you can actually, in a strange sort of way, look back on an event that if you told someone else that you were looking back on an event with thanksgiving to God, they'd say you're a madman and you need to be put in a madhouse. How could you ever give thanks for what you just described? You'd say, listen, I'm not the author of my fate, God is. And God chose in his wisdom, in his sovereign wisdom, for me to pass through this dark valley. But I can tell you, having been there, that he was there every second. And I'm thankful for that experience. I'm thankful for that experience with God. I'm not thankful for the event. Of course, I wouldn't have ever wanted that to happen. But I'm thankful for that moment with God. So Abraham, by trial, was able to see what was in his heart. Became visible, became known. Now that's a positive story. Abraham, unfortunately, has a lot of negative stories too, where by trial, what was seen in his heart was repulsive, actually. Sickening, disgusting. We're going to talk about one now with Peter in the New Testament. Peter was also mined. He had miners by trial go into his heart, into his bones. The way that Peter underwent trial is by, on 3 separate occasions, him being asked, do you know Jesus? Are you a follower of Jesus? I think I've seen you with him. Are you really a follower of Jesus? Trial. Why is it a trial? Well, because Jesus is about to die. And if he says he's been with Jesus, if he's a follower of Jesus, he might just die too. There might be a 4th cross. So it's a trial. Peter is mined. He's excavated. He's entered through trial so that Peter might be able to see what's in his bones. And unfortunately, unlike Abraham in this case, when he's dissected, when he's mined, fear, lying, self-reliance, doubt, unbelief crawl out of him like nasty spiders and cockroaches when he's cut open. All of these nasty, nasty descriptions, nasty, nasty actions just crawl out of him. And he weeps. But it's beneficial. It's good for him to see what's inside of him. And were it not for the trial, he wouldn't have known how all those things were lying dormant in him until the people asked the question, do you know the man? Were you with the man? Are you one of his followers? And in that moment, Peter could be grateful that what was in him in the unseen places came out of him in the seen places, even though it was cheap and common by comparison and not precious metals, like was seen in Abraham in this one event. So, in each case, trials show what's inside of you, either good or bad, but it's helpful for you to see that. In this morning's text, we've got Isaac. He's going through a great trial. And the text, like Genesis always is, it's very brief in its descriptions. It doesn't pontificate. It just gives you the bare bones of the story. And what we have for the bare bones of the story is always enough. It's always enough to help us and guide us, to show us what's happening in the text. And for you faithful readers or listeners to Genesis, this might be a hard one to catch. But what we find is that a famine came to the land of Canaan. That was the land to which God called Abraham and his descendants. And we know that when the famine came, the text tells us that Isaac went to Gerar. Now, I'm arguing from silence here, but just in the previous chapter, when Rebekah couldn't give birth to children, what did Isaac do? Does anybody remember? He prayed. He prayed. And Rebekah conceived twins. This time it doesn't tell us that Isaac prayed. This time it tells us he's in Gerar. What do we know about Gerar? Gerar is the land of the Philistines. What do we know about Gerar, the land of the Philistines? Here's what we know about Gerar. Gerar is the fastest track from Canaan to Egypt. It's the quickest route. You want to get directions? Everyone says, on the golf trips we always argue which way is quicker back to the church, over 74 or over 80. And I'm sure you all have your opinions, and I don't care what they are. But you want to ask, how do you get to Egypt? There's no question. From Canaan, well, you go through Gerar. That's how you get to Egypt. And that's exactly what Isaac is doing. Well, what do we know about Egypt? Well, Egypt is just a land. There's nothing good or bad about Egypt. People frequently say, the city's evil and the country's better, or this sort of thing. There's no truth to that. So don't say that, don't think that. The only thing that makes a city more evil than the countryside is per inch by inch sinners. That's all that makes, there's nothing intrinsically sinful about Chicago or Los Angeles or New York. There's just more sinners there, that's all. There's nothing wrong with the city. Our hearts are the problem. So there's nothing wrong with Egypt. But here is the problem that tends to happen when people go to Egypt. Egypt did well in famines. Egypt was lower, and so water worked its way to it. When we go on these wilderness trips and we travel, we'll go through like Wyoming, and it's really barren and just desolate, and you just kind of sandy, dry grass everywhere. But then as you go down a hill or something, you'll see a bunch of green trees. Well, those green trees are by a little bit of a creek or a river when it rains. And so water goes down, and Egypt is down from Canaan. It's a valley, and it's got water, and so it does well in a famine. So that's nothing wrong with that about Egypt. But here's what's wrong with the patriarchs, with the men, the leading men, so to speak, of the scriptures, and why they go to Egypt or rely on Egypt. They rely on Egypt essentially as an alternate to who? To God. And that's always a problem. Egypt's not the problem. Their reliance on Egypt is the problem. Their heart's transference of relying on God to relying on Egypt is the problem. Because throughout the Bible, the refrain is, it's not by the might of man, it's not by the might of chariots, it's not by the strength of my arm, it's by the strength of the Lord that we are sustained. So Isaac, you get the impression, is going on autopilot. Probably not praying like he did with Rebekah, and he's going immediately to Egypt. And the text is very helpful for us and instructive, and it tells us there was a famine in the land. Now, reader, I'm going to tell you, it's not the famine that Abraham, Isaac's father, had. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge, say no more. This is a new famine. And so we're going to get to see how Isaac, Abraham's son, responds to a famine. Will he respond like Abraham and go to Egypt? Or will he respond differently? Because Abraham went to Egypt. Isaac so far has responded differently than his father. When Rebekah couldn't have children, Isaac didn't go to a slave woman like Abraham did. When he went to Hagar, he prayed and God supplied. So Isaac did well in his first trial. Now he's in a second trial. How is he going to do? Straight to Egypt. He's not doing well. He's doing what Abraham did, and worse, he's doing it after Abraham did it. It's very likely that Isaac would have known something to the effect of what happened if Abraham communicated it to him. You remember that Abraham, when he was caught in a famine, he too relied on his own resources and his own mind and his own wisdom, and he went to Egypt, and something terrible happened in Egypt. So Abraham had this trial, and it revealed in him what it's now revealing in his son Isaac, that he's going on autopilot, and he's relying on his own reserves, his own knowledge, and he's going to Egypt. But after Abraham went to Egypt and had everything go wrong, we have another, what could be called trial in Abraham's life that revealed truth about Abraham, is when he got back, him and his nephew Lot have all these herds and they're doing awesome, but their herdsmen, their shepherds are starting to fight, so they have to separate. So Abraham has to call a shot and say, okay, one of us needs to live here and one of us needs to live here. And it's sort of like I gave an example when we went through that text. It's like a couple guys are working together, but one guy's clearly the boss, and he brought another guy in to work under him, but the business is doing exceedingly well. And the boss is now having to build a building to keep up with the booming business. And as he builds the building, he's got the blueprint with all the offices there, and he's got his nephew working with him. And imagine the boss taking the blueprints with the office suites and everything, and he lays it out, rolls it out for the nephew to look at, and the nephew says, oh man, do I have an office in here? And he says, you take your pick. And the nephew's like, well, I mean, this one's got a bathroom, none of the other ones do. This one's corner, it's got windows everywhere, and it's got a bathroom, and none of the other ones are like, and he said, I said take your pick. It's all yours. Do what you want. That's what Abraham does with Lot, with the land that he's been given. He says, take your pick. Lot chooses the Jordan Valley, which is low, where water goes. Abraham gives him it. He gives it to him. Because Abraham realizes, God will sustain me. I'm not going to go a different way anymore. I'm going to just lean into God and trust that the grass will be green. It'll work out. And soon after that, God responds to Abraham, and he says, I want to show you, Abraham, just how full the land is that I've given you. So he takes him to a high mountain. So God is clearly pleased with Abraham's freedom, with the building, so to speak. But what happens to Isaac in this trial is not what Abraham did secondly. It's what he did firstly. And Isaac starts going to Egypt. And this is the second way in which trials can be a blessing to us. The first is that trials show us what's inside of us. The second point I want to make this morning is that trials help identify our idols. Trials help identify our idols. And it's here that I want to just stop for a moment. Friends, you and I are like in rooms. We're each in our own room. And this room is a room that we desperately want to get out of. We're yearning to get out of this room. This room is our trial. This room is our situation. It's one of our top 5 things. It's the thing that most annoys us right now. We're in this room, and we want out. We want desperately to get out of this room and into another space. But we're faced with a decision. And the decision is this. We either wait on God to show us an exit to this room, from this room, or we find the exit that's right in front of us, but that God wouldn't be pleased with. So it's one or the other. We wait in this room, even though it's a room we really don't want to be in, we desperately want to get out, and we wait for God to show us an exit, or we choose the door right in front of us that will get us out instantaneously, so we think. But that's a door that God would shake his head at. Don't take that route. Don't go that way. Don't go to that other room. Now, I want to help you identify the room you're in. Can I help you do that this morning? If you haven't pictured it already, I want to help you. I'm going to ask you a series of questions that are written by a man named Edward Welch in a short little booklet called Motives. And as I read through these questions, I was just so instructed as to what my room looked like. And you don't need to know what my room looks like, okay? So, I'm just going to read these questions. They're going to be on the screen. And I just want you to think about it. Kind of the first thing that pops into your mind. You ready? What are the times when life doesn't seem worth living? Next, what do you love? What do you hate? What do you hope for, want, crave? Next, what is your goal? What's your goal in life? What are your dreams or fantasies? Next, what do you fear? What do you worry about? Next, what do you feel you need? Where do you find refuge, comfort, pleasure, or security? Next, what defines success or failure for you? Next, when do you say, if only ... Next, where do you believe that God has let you down? Next, when have you struggled with bitterness or jealousy? And when you are struggling with bitterness or jealousy, what are you saying you want? Next, when do you get depressed because your idol has let you down? Next, what do you see as your rights? When do you get angry? Now, friends, if there was one answer that kept coming to the fore, coming to the front of your mind, the tip of your tongue, you are likely looking at one of your major idols. Now, realize that that can change from time to time, from moment to moment, from circumstance to circumstance. We're very good at going from one idol to the next, given the current circumstance we're in. But what came to your mind with all those questions was probably one of your 5 major idols, if there was a common answer. But in any given moment, whatever that answer might be to these questions, you're probably looking at one of your idols. What would you say was Isaac's idol in his decision to go to Egypt? Well, if you were asking Isaac at this point in his life, I think his answer would have a lot to do with food. You see, the tricky thing about this is that in many cases, your idol may not be something that's intrinsically bad. Food's not bad. Probably most of what you answer to all these questions, no one in this room would say, that's sinful. Probably. Now maybe. But even if you got to the root of the thing you wanted, people would say, yeah, God created us to desire such a thing. Such an experience, such a feeling, such a emotion, something of that sort if you went down deep below it. So many of the things that are our idols are not necessarily bad things in and of themselves. I want you to listen to a quote by Ed Welch that he continues. Listen what he says. He says, most of our answers are not bad in themselves, but when we value them more than God, they become idols. The problem is not so much that we want these things, but that we want them too much. They become our goal, our hope, our purpose. We feel like we need them. When they're out of reach, life seems meaningless. That's an idol. Now, friends, listen. God created us material. We are material beings who desire material things. God made it that way. But He didn't create us to live under what I would call the tyranny of the tangible. He didn't create us to be slaves to the material. He didn't create us that way. My article this month is regarding the fact that the Bible begins with very instructive words. Are you ready for them? In the beginning, God. In the beginning, God. Now, what does God want to communicate with these 4 words? I think He wants to communicate something very instructive, and that is this. Everything you see, desire, want, touch, taste, hear, I created. I am behind and before time, space, and matter. I chose to create such marvelous entities. And I think it's at this point that we have to be so careful to catch these 4 words, because here's the deal. Satan wants to perform a bait and switch. Your heart, my heart, wants to perform a bait and switch. And here's the bait and switch. Now we have the material, so the material becomes our God, instead of the spiritual entity, namely God, who created the material. So there's a bait and switch that takes place. And now we're tempted to see the true life in the thing and not the creator. In the creation, whatever it is, whether it be food or whatever your idol is, you're tempted to see life there. See it as a life source, a route to joy. But God discredits that by saying, in the beginning, God. He is the place from which life actually comes. So life cannot be found anywhere outside of Him. And this brings us to the third blessing of a trial. Our third and final blessing of our trial this morning. Trials give God an entrance. Trials give God an entrance. I want you to catch this incredibly true quote by a Jewish commentator named Nahum Sarna. And this quote isn't just true for Isaac and Abraham and Jacob. It's true for Israel. It's true for you. It's true for humanity. Check it out. The sharp contrast between God's promises for the future and the threatening reality of the present is a recurring theme in the patriarchal narratives. The recurring theme of God's wonderful promises for the future and the threatening reality of the present is a recurring theme in life following God. God has given us majestic promises, friends. And He allows the most grievous trials to come to our doorstep almost every day, to some extent. Why? Why? Why does God do that? Why does God make such wonderful promises in the future and give us such awful moments in the present that we would push away, that we'd eschew any moment of any day? Why does He do it? Here's why. I think God wants to intermingle with His promises the alluring threat of that which is material, or at least what our heart makes a threat, so that He can profoundly overcome such deficits. The material things that stress us out cannot bring us joy. They can't. It's not in them. It's outside of them. It's in God. And trials push us to God. In the heart of a believer, in the mind of a believer, when a believer experiences a trial, he or she is naturally pushed to God. Now, it may take him a while. This guy might jump to God in a moment's notice. This person might jump to God after 3 to 6 months, depending on your spiritual climate. But you will, if you're a believer, you will go to God. You'll go to Him. You will rely on Him at some point. It might be on your deathbed, but you'll do it. So God continues to allow trials to come into our lives, things that we would otherwise want away, so that we're brought to His doorstep. So the trials knock on our door to push us to knock on His door. Catch this incredibly offensive quote. John Owen, he's trying to picture all this. I don't really like when people speak for God, but it's worth sharing with you. He says, God says, here is one. If he could be rid of his lust, I should never hear from him. I should never hear of him more. Let him wrestle with this, or he is lost. Friends, if you want to argue with that, try arguing with 2 Corinthians and Paul's thorn in the flesh. He wants it gone. He wants it out of him. He wants it away. But God gave it to him. Why? Because God's power is the type that works best in weakness. And so, friends, whatever you have that makes you weak, let it do its perfect work in your life and push you to the strength of God. Amen? Look what C.S. Lewis says. Clearly dealing with a room that he wants to get out of. He's waiting for that door to be exposed. He can't find it yet. God hasn't shown it to him. But listen to what he says. He says, I know now, Lord, why you utter no answer. You yourself, you are yourself the answer. Before your face, questions die away. What other answer would suffice? There's no life in anything but you. If you get me out of this thing that I'm in, that I want out of, you get me in this thing that I want to be into, it still wouldn't give me life. Only you can supply life. You're the life giver. You're the life source. You're the foundation of life. There's nothing underneath you. So of course, you don't utter an answer because you're the answer. This is the truth he wants to bring you and me to. And this is the truth he's always wanted to bring his people to. Look at Deuteronomy 8, 3-5. Speaking to Israel, he humbled you and let you hunger. It's no fun. That's a room everybody wants out of. And fed you with manna, which you did not know, nor did your fathers know, that he might make you know. Where does it come from? That man does not live by bread alone, but man lives by every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. That's how man lives. Your clothing did not wear out on you, and your foot did not swell these 40 years. 40 years. Come on. Clothes not wearing out? In the harsh elements? Sandals not wearing out? Know then, in your heart, as a man disciplines his son, the Lord your God disciplines you. So the thing you want gone, God has given you to discipline you, to show you that even if you got the answer to the thing you want gone, you wouldn't have found life any better truly, deeply, soulfully. Because life can only get better with God. That's the facts. He is life. There's nowhere else. Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. He is the only access to life in the Father. So, this is how it works. Trials show you what's in your guts. And what it will show you, likely, is your idol. And as your idol is exposed to the light elements, you're able to see it for what it is and to see how actually inferior it is to the true life-giving source, which is God. And when you come to that realization, you will be like Abraham, who says to Lot, you take your pick, man. It honestly doesn't matter to me, because life is not in the Jordan Valley. I know what you're thinking, because I'm thinking the same thing. It's green, everything else is brown. But it's not there. Don't be deceived, Lot. God is the source. He's the life giver. So this is what God says to Isaac as he's headed towards his idol. Nothing wrong with Egypt. But in Isaac, there's something wrong with Egypt. Genesis 26, 2 and 3. The Lord appeared to him and said, do not go down to Egypt. Dwell in the land of which I shall tell you. Sojourn in this land, and I will be with you and will bless you. Enough said. And that's what the author of Hebrews says in Hebrews 13 when people are tempted to defile the marital bed and have premarital sex and tempted to go towards money and find power and strength in money. The author of Hebrews says, stop. Do you want to know how to fight sexual pleasure, the allurement of it? Do you want to know how to fight your desire for money, which you feel like gives you so much power? Here's how you fight. The Lord is my helper. What can man do to me? That's how you're content. I have God. I don't need anything else. It's like Pastor Alex prayed in his prayer. He who has, this is from C.S. Lewis, he who has God and everything else has no more than he who has God alone. So friend, brother, sister, let your trial show you what's inside you. Let it show you your mettle, for better or for worse. Let it do that. And if it's for worse, let it show you your idol. And once you see your idol, look at how inferior it is and turn to Jesus. Turn to him, and he'll bring you to Psalm 16:11. You make known to me the path of life. In you is pleasure forevermore. In you are something to that effect. You know, this trial probably seemed so incredibly huge to Isaac, as it likely would have felt to any one of us in this room. But I want to share with you a thought that Pastor Alex shared with me this week that might give some perspective. Isaac's standing there, no food around. Famine seems humongous, writ large in his mind. And this is the thing Pastor Alex shared with me. Imagine for a moment that you instantly turned into a giant that was so big you could hold the earth in your hand as though the earth were as big as a cue ball, a pool ball. Okay? So instantly, boom, you're a giant. You can hold the earth as though it were the size of a pool ball. And then you decided as a giant to run your finger across the ball of earth. Do you know that if you were the size of a giant and you were holding the actual earth and you ran your finger across the ball, it would feel as smooth as a pool ball? With 26,000 foot Mount Everest and 4 miles deep ocean crest floor, if you went from the ocean to Mount Everest with your finger, it would feel as smooth as a pool ball. Is that incredible? Is that just, I think the difference is like 11 miles, it turns out to be. As smooth as a pool ball, if you were as big as a giant. But here we stand, and we look at Everest, and we say, wow, Everest. We look at these submarines that go down into where there's no light at the ocean floor, and the pressure's beginning to crush it and all this stuff. We say, man, the ocean floor, so deep. And then we say, man, this trial is so big. How am I ever going to succeed? How am I ever going to get out of this? How am I ever going to endure, or withstand not going out that door right there? It's impossible. And God holds the universe. Friends, listen to how God describes how Abraham began to catch a glimpse of what the text is saying. Look at Genesis 26, 5 and 6. And I want you to look at the word that's repeated beyond any other word. God says about Abraham, and he desires to say about you and me. Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. What's the word? My. Abraham got to the place where he said, you pick any spot on planet Earth, and I'm going to tell you which spot I pick. The one that's with God. That's all I want. That's enough for me. I don't care what trappings come with these spots or these locations or these jobs or this person or whatever. I don't care what comes with it. All I want is God. That's it. That's why, as Pastor shared with you, there's a gentleman in prison for his faith, and to punish him, the guards would put him in the dung chamber where all the excess of the men went, the sewer, and the man actually loved it there because he could praise God most freely of any place in the whole prison. He loved it. It was intimate fellowship with the Lord. So you pick the worst location, and Abraham says, yeah, I'll be there. Count me in, because that's where he is. And he's enough. He's enough to give me joy unlike anything else. So the psalmist can say, listen, people rejoice when the wine comes in and when the harvest comes in. I'm telling you, my rejoice is his presence. That's better than anything else. So Abraham caught this, and Isaac is beginning to catch the flavor. He stays where God tells him to stay, in Gerar. He's going to screw up big time next week. But for the time being, he leaned on the Lord. Friends, if God created the earth, and he gave us his most precious possession of his own son, why won't he give us joy too? And the joy that's to be found is to only be found in him. Amen? Amen. I'm going to ask you musicians to come as we close.